Have you ever wondered how someone who couldn't read a script became a silver screen legend? What secrets carried these unlettered talents from anonymity to Academy acclaim? Stay tuned as we reveal the remarkable journeys of Hollywood's least educated stars, and how sheer charisma proved more powerful than any diploma. Bud Abbott. Who's on first? In the immortal comedy routine by Abbott and Costello, Bud Abbott is the suave, straight man guiding the chaos. You'd never suspect that Bud, with his rapid-fire patter and sharp timing, had dropped out of school in the 4th grade. Born in 1895, Bud grew up around Coney Island, New York, in a family of circus and carnival folk. Schooling took a back seat to show business from the very beginning. In fact, Bud quit grammar school as a 10-year-old boy to work at Coney Island's famous amusement park, shoveling coal and barking for sideshow attractions. His classroom became the carnival midway, full of hustlers, oddballs, and laughter, an education in human nature if not in arithmetic. The reasons were straightforward. Working was simply more pressing than schooling for Bud. His father was a circus agent, and the Abbott family moved with the seasonal shows. Bud once joked that by the time he was supposed to learn long division, he was already busy learning how to get people to buy tickets to the freak show. In the early 1900s, many kids in showbiz families followed a similar path. The tradition often was, join the act, earn your keep. Bud Abbott certainly did. By his teens, he was touring with burlesque companies, absorbing the rhythms of comedy and the art of timing comedic feeds and punchlines. Though he never studied literature, he became a master of wordplay on stage, developing a quick wit that would serve him for life. How did Bud, with such little formal schooling, end up as one half of one of the most famous comedy duos in history? Experience was his teacher. He spent years as a box office manager and producer for burlesque theaters, where he learned what made audiences laugh. He honed his verbal skills backstage, practicing tongue twisters and jokes. By the time he teamed up with Lou Costello in the mid-1930s, Bud Abbott's comedic instincts were honed to razor sharpness. Their breakout routine, Who's on First, showcases Bud's verbal agility. Leading the routine required not just memorization, but the kind of nimble mind that can juggle nonsense names and still keep the act on track. Bud managed it flawlessly, despite having left school as a child. In fact, one could say his ability to handle that routine came from his carnival barking days, where quick thinking and a strong voice were key. Bud Abbott rarely spoke about his lack of education, perhaps because he didn't want pity. He was too busy making the world laugh. But those close to him knew he took pride in being a self-made comedian. He had learned bookkeeping on his own to run theater ticket sales, and he read newspapers daily to keep his banter topical. Lou Costello. Lou Costello, the roly-poly, clownish counterpart to Bud Abbott, had a very different background, but one that similarly lacked a formal academic finish. Lou was born in 1906 in Paterson, New Jersey, to a large working-class Italian-American family. In high school, Lou was a sports star, an exceptional basketball player despite his short stature, and he also nurtured dreams of acting, idolizing the silent film comedian Charlie Chaplin. By 10th grade, Lou decided he'd had enough of classes. He dropped out of high school and hitchhiked his way to Hollywood, determined to break into the movies. It was a bold, headstrong move for a teenager, especially one without money or connections. The late 1920s mindset allowed for such gambles. The film industry was a booming new frontier, and plenty of young people believed talent could outweigh pedigree or education. Lou Costello was one of them. The personal reason for his dropout was simple. He believed in himself. Classroom learning held little appeal when the silver screen was calling. He took odd jobs at MGM and Warner Brothers studios as a laborer, carpenter, even a stuntman. This was Lou's self-devised film school. He observed actors and crews at work, picking up pointers even as he painted sets and swept floors. Despite his lack of formal schooling, Lou's big break came not in acting at first, but in comedy. By 1930, he found himself stranded in St. Joseph, Missouri, with no money. To get back home, he started performing comedy in local burlesque houses. With his natural humor and rubbery expressions, Lou quickly found that making people laugh was his true calling. This path eventually led him to meet Bud Abbott in 1936, and the chemistry was instantaneous. Lou's gift for comic confusion paired perfectly with Bud's straight-man finesse. Their success skyrocketed on radio and then in films during the 1940s. Lou became beloved for his childlike, goofy persona. That persona drew on Lou's real-life youthful exuberance and perhaps a bit of naivete. After all, he was someone who had leapt into the world without a safety net of education or a fallback plan. Lou Costello proved that street smarts and chutzpah can make up for a lack of diplomas. He never did get that high school degree, but he achieved something few could. He made an entire nation laugh during some of its hardest years. Off-screen, Lou was known as a kind, if somewhat innocent soul. Colleagues sometimes gently teased him for mispronouncing big words or not knowing certain historical facts, remnants of his truncated schooling. But that never bothered Lou much. He gave his all to his craft and his family. Barbara Stanwyck. Barbara Stanwyck was the very picture of toughness and independence on screen, often playing women who survive by their wits. That fire was lit by her own life. Born Ruby Stevens in 1907 in Brooklyn, Barbara endured a tragic start. Her mother died when she was 4, and her father abandoned the family soon after. She bounced between foster homes and an elder sister's care. By age 13, Ruby was, for all intents and purposes, on her own. She had dreamed of being a dancer from early childhood. Recognizing that, and facing financial need, she quit school at 13 during junior high. To support herself, she wrapped packages at a department store and worked other menial jobs. There was simply no time or money for further schooling. In the 1920s, it wasn't uncommon for orphans or children of extreme poverty to drop out early. Barbara's situation was extreme. She later said she never knew a real childhood or the normalcy of staying in school. Instead, her education came from the streets of Brooklyn and the stages of vaudeville. At 15, she landed a job as a chorus girl, hanging by her hands from a suspended chandelier in a Ziegfeld Follies show. Night after night, while other teens studied algebra, Barbara was learning discipline and performance in the chorus line. It was a hard-knock education, long hours, fending off predatory men, saving every penny. She learned self-reliance quickly. Stanwyck's rise from those beginnings was meteoric. She made it to Broadway by her late teens and then to Hollywood by 1929. Rechristened Barbara Stanwyck, she leveraged her life-hardened grit into a series of acclaimed roles. In Stella Dallas, Ball of Fire, Double Indemnity, and dozens more, Stanwyck's characters were often street-smart, scrappy women, not unlike herself. How did she compensate for her lack of formal education? By being an attentive student of life. Co-stars noticed her listening intently to directors' instructions, reading scripts thoroughly, and always being the first on set, totally prepared. Barbara may not have learned from teachers, but she learned from experience and from mentors in the industry. Frank Capra, who directed her early on, was impressed by how quickly she picked up the nuances of acting and filmmaking. Barbara Stanwyck was also known for her professionalism and intellect off-camera. She was well-spoken, having largely erased any telltale accent of a poor Brooklyn upbringing. Her library at home was filled with books. She educated herself in literature and the arts later in life, demonstrating a hunger for knowledge despite her early dropout. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn, the swashbuckling hero of Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood, lived a life as wild as the characters he played. Flynn was born in 1909 to respectable parents in Tasmania, Australia. His father was a professor, so you'd think education might have been a given. But young Errol was the proverbial black sheep. He was bright but absolutely unruly. By his own later admission, he was expelled from every school I ever attended. Indeed, Errol attended a string of schools and managed to get thrown out of each one by his mid-teens. He never came close to completing high school. One expulsion was for fighting and, as scandal has it, for a dalliance with a school laundress. Another was for basically refusing to abide by any rules. The reasons behind Flynn's lack of formal education were largely personal defiance. He chafed under authority. We can also suspect possible dyslexia, or ADHD, given his restless nature and later difficulties with rote tasks. But in the 1920s, such things were undiagnosed. All that's certain is that Errol Flynn preferred the school of adventure. At 17, after his final expulsion, he set off to find fortune in New Guinea as a gold miner, plantation overseer, and occasional petty thief. A real-life Huckleberry Finn existence. That rough-and-tumble life taught Errol far more than a classroom could. Sword fighting, navigation at sea, survival skills, and fearless confidence. How did this near-feral young man end up a Hollywood superstar? Fate and charisma. Flynn's escapades eventually led him to acting in Australian films purely by happenstance, and he showed a natural screen presence. Warner Brothers brought him to Los Angeles in the mid-1930s. Once there, Flynn's athleticism and devil-may-care attitude made him perfect for heroic roles. He had to refine himself a bit. Early on, the studio gave him lessons in voice and manners to fit the image of a polished hero. But Errol never lost his mischievous streak or his penchant for learning by doing. When it came time to film elaborate sword duels, he trained vigorously with experts until he mastered the moves. Rita Hworth. Rita Hworth was known as the ultimate Hollywood love goddess of the 1940s. Born Margarita Cancino in 1918, she actually grew up on stage rather than in a classroom. Rita's father, a strict Spanish flamenco dancer, had her performing professionally by age 12. At 13, he pulled her out of school entirely to take her on the road as his dance partner in nightclubs and casinos. Ninth grade would be the last formal education Rita ever had. Her childhood became an endless series of rehearsals and performances. She later sighed that in her youth, "Rehearsing was the sole focus of my life." The reasons behind Rita's lack of schooling were deeply personal. Her father was determined to continue the family's dance legacy, and, disturbingly, he also began to abuse her during these tours. Rita found herself trapped, unable to return to the normal life of a schoolgirl. The historical reality for many showbiz children then was that parents often put careers above education. For Rita, dancing was not just a passion, but a duty, and a form of escape from an even harsher reality at home. How did Rita conquer Hollywood despite this? Dance itself was her education. By the time she was spotted by a Fox film scout at age 16, she had mastered discipline, grace, and the ability to perform under intense pressure. She soon transformed from dark-haired Margarita Cancino to auburn-haired Rita Hworth, a marquee star. On set, Rita was shy about her academic shortcomings. She sometimes struggled with complex dialogue or unfamiliar words. But she compensated for being impeccably prepared in every other way. Her work ethic was legendary. Hours of practice to nail a dance number or a scene. In films like Gilda, she mesmerized audiences not with bookish sophistication, but with smoldering magnetism and precise, practiced talent. Over time, Rita educated herself in the ways that mattered to her career. She improved her English pronunciation, learned to navigate Hollywood's social circles, and even became an avid reader of scripts and novels to deepen her acting. As the studio era continued, even the music world's superstars weren't immune to abbreviated educations. Enter a skinny kid from New Jersey who left high school to chase a dream and became the chairman of the board. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra's smooth, crooning voice and magnetic presence made him a superstar singer and actor. But academically, Old Blue Eyes sang a different tune. Frank was born in 1915 in Hoboken, New Jersey, to Italian immigrant parents. He was an only child doted on by his strong-willed mother. School never held Frank's interest. He was itching to perform. In 1931, at age 15, Sinatra's mother gave her blessing for him to drop out of high school so he could pursue singing full-time. Frank never graduated. His formal education ended in his sophomore year. The reasons were part personal passion, part immigrant family pragmatism. The country was in the Great Depression, and Sinatra saw a chance to earn money with his voice. Also, Frank's father, though he had little education himself, strongly believed in self-reliance. Sinatra often noted that his father taught him the value of hard work more than any teacher could. Young Frank took that to heart. If school wasn't helping him become a singer, he'd find his own way. And he did, singing in local clubs and on radio. How did Sinatra manage to make it without finishing school? He became a relentless student of music. He idolized Bing Crosby and studied every nuance of Bing's recordings. Night after night, teenage Frank practiced singing, even recording himself on a cheap machine to play back and critique. This discipline paid off when he got his first break with the Harry James Band, and later with Tommy Dorsey. Sinatra's phrasing and emotional interpretation of lyrics were unparalleled. It was as if he had a Ph.D. in expressing the soul of a song. In films, too, he proved naturally adept. Though he joked about not knowing the fancy jargon of acting, he had streetwise instincts that lent authenticity to roles like Maggio in From Here to Eternity. Sinatra remained somewhat self-conscious about his limited formal schooling. In later years, he educated himself through life experience, reading biographies, talking to writers and politicians, and mastering business savvy in the entertainment industry. He also made sure his own children got the education he didn't. Dean Martin. Dean Martin, one of Sinatra's Rat Pack buddies and an entertainment legend in his own right, also took an unorthodox path. Dean was born Dino Crocetti in 1917 in Steubenville, Ohio, to Italian immigrant parents. Growing up, he actually spoke only Italian until starting school, which put him behind with English. Young Dino was more interested in boxing, playing cards, and singing than in homework. He reportedly dropped out in the 10th grade, quipping that he thought he was smarter than his teachers. A bit of bravado hiding the fact that formal school just wasn't his forte. Instead of going to class, Dino worked odd jobs: steel mill laborer, gas station attendant, blackjack dealer at a local speakeasy, even an amateur boxer under the name Kid Crochet. Each of these endeavors taught him something and toughened him up. The social environment of Steubenville, a rough mining town, partly dictated Dino's choices. It was a place where a young man could make more money from a crap game or a boxing match than by finishing high school. Dean Martin's lack of formal education was balanced by a wealth of life education. He learned comedy timing by watching burlesque shows he worked at, learned confidence by singing to drunk bar patrons, and picked up an effortless cool by surviving and thriving in an adult world while still a teen. How did this high school dropout become the king of cool? By leveraging his natural gifts and charisma. Dean had a velvety voice and an uncanny ease on stage. He started singing with local bands, which led to a gig in New York City. There he crossed paths with a young comedian named Jerry Lewis. The two formed a duo in 1946, and Martin and Lewis quickly became the hottest act in America. Dean's role in their comedy was the smooth, straight man, basically playing himself, unflappable, witty, and a step ahead, as if nothing could surprise him. That confidence might never have developed in a sheltered classroom. It was forged in pool halls and nightclubs. As a solo performer in the 1950s and 60s, Dean Martin conquered music, movies, and television, seemingly with a cocktail in one hand and a joke on his lips. People who knew Dean joked that he had a master's in being cool. He didn't need books to charm an audience or to host his own TV variety show. Sammy Davis Jr. Few entertainers have ever been as multi-talented as Sammy Davis Jr. He could sing, dance, act, do impressions, and play multiple instruments. Astoundingly, this dynamo achieved it all without ever attending a single day of traditional school. Sammy was born in 1925 and literally grew up in show business. As a 3-year-old, little Sammy joined his father and uncle on stage in vaudeville as part of the Will Maston Trio. Because the trio was constantly touring the country, Sammy had no opportunity for formal schooling. "I didn't have one day of formal education," Sammy later lamented. "I never sat in a classroom in my life. That's the one strict thing I have with my kids. Get an education." Those words reveal both pride in his accomplishments and a poignant regret over what he missed. The reasons were largely historical and racial. In the 1930s and 40s, even if Sammy's father had wanted to put him in school, it would have been difficult. The troupe was always on the move, and in many places, educational opportunities for black children were woefully limited or rigidly segregated. Instead, Sammy's education came from the vaudeville circuit. He learned to read by deciphering song sheets and comic books on the road. He learned math by helping count ticket receipts. And he learned history by experiencing the brutal realities of American racism firsthand as a touring black performer. How did Sammy Davis Jr. overcome this lack of formal education? Through sheer brilliance and hunger to learn in other ways. His father did hire tutors occasionally on tour, but most of Sammy's learning was informal. He watched and imitated everything. By his teens, he could impersonate famous white actors whom he wasn't even allowed to meet due to segregation, just from observing their films. He poured himself into perfecting his tap dancing and taught himself to play drums, piano, and trumpet. His voracious appetite for performing left no time to feel inferior about not going to school. When Sammy finally broke through to stardom, first on Broadway, then in Hollywood films, and as a member of Sinatra's Rat Pack, his raw talent eclipsed any need for diplomas. On stage, he exuded an education of the soul. Yet Sammy did feel the pang of it. He called his lack of schooling his one great regret. In later years, he educated himself broadly, reading books on philosophy and religion, becoming a passionate civil rights advocate, and even learning to speak some Japanese and Hebrew for his wives. Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis, the wild funny man, who partnered with Dean Martin and later directed his own hit comedies, took a route familiar to many comedians. He was the class clown who didn't last in class for long. Born in 1926 to vaudeville entertainer parents, Jerry started performing at age 5, doing slapstick bits in his parents' Catskills Mountain shows. Formal school took a back seat to his showbiz aspirations and hyperactive energy. He was expelled from high school in the 9th grade for misbehavior, and after a brief attempt at another school, he dropped out for good by 16. Jerry later half-joked that he got kicked out of throwing a water balloon at the principal, a prankster at heart. In truth, sitting still behind a desk was torture for a kid who lived to make people laugh. The era, the early 1940s, saw many young men leaving school early to join the workforce or the military. Jerry took a different path. He joined the workforce of entertainment. Hitting the road as a teenager, he honed a unique act pantomiming crazy comic songs on stage. This lack of schooling wasn't seen as a detriment in the nightclub circuit, where Jerry found success. If anything, his youthful, anarchic persona benefited from seeming a little rough around the edges. How did Jerry Lewis overcome his educational shortfall? By letting his natural creativity run free. His comedic mind was a whirlwind that formal education might have tried to tame, but unbridled, it flourished. At 19, he partnered with Dean Martin, and their chemistry captivated America. Jerry brought a childlike exuberance to their act, throwing himself into every sketch with fearless physical comedy. He didn't need to quote Shakespeare or do calculus. He needed only to tap into the uninhibited imagination he'd always had. When Martin and Lewis split in 1956, many doubted Jerry could succeed solo. But Jerry Lewis proved not just a funny performer, but a brilliant writer-director, creating hits like The Nutty Professor. He innovated with new filmmaking techniques without any formal training in film school. His intuition and drive led him to teach at USC's film school later, quite ironic for a high school dropout. Jerry, with typical self-awareness, often acknowledged his lack of formal education in interviews, usually with a joke. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando, often hailed as the greatest actor of the 20th century, revolutionized screen acting with his emotional, natural style. It's striking that someone so finely attuned to human behavior struggled deeply in the structured world of schooling. Brando was born in 1924 in Omaha, Nebraska. His childhood was turbulent. An alcoholic mother he adored. A domineering father he despised. Marlon reacted by acting out. In his early teens, living in Illinois, he did so poorly in classes and defied authority so much that his parents sent him to Shattuck Military Academy in hopes of instilling discipline. But even the strict military school couldn't contain Brando's mischief. Famously, he was expelled in his final year of high school. One prank too many. Thus, he never received a high school diploma. Brando later admitted that not having a formal education has always been a source of embarrassment for him. A surprising confession from such a lauded figure. The reasons for Brando's truncated education were largely personal and psychological. He chafed against any constraints, perhaps a reaction to his father's constant criticism. He also likely had an artistic temperament that didn't mesh with rote learning. However, after expulsion, Brando did something unusual. He found his purpose in acting. In 1943, he moved to New York and enrolled at the Dramatic Workshop and studied under the famed acting coach Stella Adler. In other words, Brando sought an alternative education, one in the craft of performance. He devoured lessons on Stanislavski's system and psychoanalysis for character development. Here was a case where a dropout found his classroom at last, just not in a traditional high school. How did Brando leverage his minimal formal education into epoch-making talent? By pouring all his intellect and emotion into acting. He read plays and literature voraciously to make up for lost time. When Brando burst onto Broadway in a streetcar named Desire at 23, he was drawing not from academic degrees but from a well of real feelings and the intensive actor training he sought out. On film in On the Waterfront or The Godfather, Brando's raw authenticity was something no school could teach. It came from life and a fearless willingness to expose himself emotionally. Though Brando achieved unparalleled success, he maintained a certain insecurity about his education. He once noted that he always felt a bit intellectually inadequate around highly educated peers, which drove him to read and learn independently throughout his life.